Thank you. Thank you so much for the invite and for the honor to be here to share some of the things that we've been working on in California with respect to shot hole borer. I just will convey that this is definitely a work in progress, what we have going on. And so I'm going to share mostly with you kind of really an overview of our strategy and our approach of how we've been addressing the issue in California. And I hope that this talk is really an opportunity for, as a launching point, to have conversations about the nitty-gritty details of all of the different things that we're working on. So I do want to acknowledge that this work is part of a multi-agency, multi-stakeholder collaborative effort that involves a variety of people who come from different perspectives, from who have interests in conservation and agriculture, city parks. They all have different interests and come to this problem from different perspectives. And we're all, we've all tried to work together on this common problem together to try and address this from in a cohesive way. So I am going to just give a brief overview of the system in California. And then I'm going to provide just a little bit of a framework and the statewide initiative, strategic initiative that we have developed that I've been a part of in California as well. And some of the lessons that we've learned in the research. And then I will end with maybe with some it kind of ties it all together with an IPM case study that we developed in Disneyland. So, because, why not end with, some hope on the happiest place on earth in Disneyland, some of the work that we've been doing that is actually a disease hotspot in Southern California. So, okay, so we in California are addressing two beetles, two introductions of Eualacia. So we have the Polyphagous shot hole borer, and we also have the Forestry shot hole borer. So we refer to this pest pathogen complex as the invasive shot hole borers in California because we are dealing with two separate introductions that carry their own fusarium pathogen species. Polyphagous shot hole borer, as you all know, carries Fusarium eualacia, and Forestry shot hole borer carries Fusarium carotium. This is essentially the distribution as we, as of recently, the essential distribution in Southern California. Just here's a little window into that for some context. The Polyphagous shot hole borer was introduced, we know, was causing a problem or known to be causing a problem around 2012. That's when the problem was really recognized and was introduced, presumably on packing material from Vietnam. And the Forestry shot hole borer was introduced late in 2013, later in San Diego County from Taiwan. And so just again, it was first detected, though, the shot hole borer, Polyphagous shot hole borer was first detected in a statewide monitoring trap in 2003 in Los Angeles. It was a single beetle that was detected. And then the problem wasn't recognized until 2012. So this was many years later until it was discovered on a backyard avocado tree in Los Angeles. And then it was a second introduction, Forestry shot hole borer, that happened in late 2013 in San Diego County. So as you are all aware, the beetle and the pathogens have a very broad host range, and the way that they affect these hosts vary to, depending on the host, and the symptoms are quite variable as well. There are 77 tree species that support beetle reproduction. That's what we refer to as competent host species. So the beetle can colonize the host, it can produce a gallery, it can, the fungus can colonize those galleries, and then the beetle can then reproduce and produce offspring. In California, 20 of those hosts are native to California. A really important host in California is avocado. It's responsible for 90% of the domestic production in the US. And roughly 25 to 60% of all of the planted trees in the urban landscape are also what we refer to as competent hosts. So these host species are distributed across heterogeneous landscapes. And I just wanted to kind of highlight, just to show, this is the avocado growing region in the state. It is restricted primarily to where that infested region is, where shot-hole borer is, invasive shot-hole borers are restricted so far, or where the distribution is so far in Southern California. One really important tree species, or I should say crop species, that we have in California is the almond. That is throughout the Central Valley. Most of our stone fruits are distributed throughout the Central Valley of California, and that distribution does not overlap with the current distribution of the invasive shot-hole borers right now. We have done some inoculation trials and have shown that the Fusarium uolacea can colonize onto the host tissue. We haven't done any trials with the beetle itself to show that it can reproduce on the tree, but it is able to support the fungus. So depending on, the effect on the host, depending on the location, these beetles can have a really severe impact. So this is a riparian habitat in San Diego County. So just right here on the southern border near Mexico. This is primarily comprised of willow tree species. And in this riparian habitat, looking over this is a Google image, within 1 year after the corrosive shot-hole borer infested the region, over 280,000 trees were killed after the infestation. And so it just completely devastated the area. And so what I'm presenting to you here is essentially, this is the worst case scenario, but just to convey that these impacts can be really, really, really devastating. This is what it looks like on the ground. So we see cascading impacts of this mortality as well. So on the ground, this is pre-infestation, and within a year, all of these trees died. And then just a few months later, we see encroachment of a highly invasive weedy species, castor bean, coming in and preventing any recruitment of our native willow tree species, which is actually serves as critical breeding habitat for our native bird species that are critically endangered in the region. So it's, this little tiny beetle has, the impact on it is, has these cascading impacts to our ecosystems as well. So we, because we found that this is a multi-land use problem that affects native plant communities, it affects urban forests, it affects agriculture. It was, this multi-land use problem. We identified pretty quickly that we really needed to have a framework to be able to address this issue address the complexity of the issue in a way that we could be flexible and strategic and, do something and in an iterative process so that, we are at least doing something while we were learning more and more about the problem. And so, given the nature of this little tiny beast, the framework that we identified was this integrated pest management strategy that we came up with was, not too different from most, but it was, to really set in a good monitoring and early detection program while researching the basic biology, conducting risk assessments to understand where the beetle and the pathogen are going to go and cause the most damage. And that monitoring and early detection is there to help elicit that rapid response. Developing control options in the meantime so that they can be tailored to the appropriate settings in those locations where we identify risk. And also stakeholder engagement and also reflection. So working with stakeholders and identifying what works, what doesn't work, tailoring those, tailoring these control options to the needs of, what's going on the ground as well. And so this isn't a linear process. This is iterative. This, these things are constantly changing. Often, everything's being done all at the same time. All of this kind of then fed into, this was around, 2012, 2013. And then, roughly about 4 or 5 years later, as we, were putting these things together, this started to evolve into a statewide strategy through the California Invasive Species Advisory Committee. And this is where the state started to get involved. The CISAC is a committee that is they advise basically the Invasive Species Council. It's a state council that makes decisions about invasive species in California. And they basically advise on best measures to forestall ecological and economic harm by invasive species. And we basically use those pieces to develop a statewide plan to respond to ISHB. I'm happy to share these slides. This is, if you click on this, it has a link to that. It has a link to that report and the outcomes of that, that outline all of the details in there. And you can read all of that. So I don't have to go into it, but I will summarize some of the elements that were in that plan. And those include trying to mitigate the movement of the pest pathogen complex through green waste and firewood as pathways. So there was basically the state funded money to try and prevent movement for long distance dispersal. They also funded a survey detection and rapid response program, as well as funding research and technology development. So there were these 4 different elements that through consensus building among different stakeholders and agencies, we all identified what these priorities were, what were the most important research priorities, what were the most important elements of green waste, what were the most important elements of survey and detection, and all of those things that we could, put into this big effort. And as well as outreach and education. So they hired a statewide outreach and education person who was responsible for doing communication for this and conveying this information to stakeholders as well, and getting the information out to the public. So all of that being said, so I'll get into some of the research. And as far as monitoring and early detection is concerned, this was some of the stuff that was, the state invested in that statewide monitoring trap program that was informed by some of the research that Richard Stouthammer had done, looking at the most effective time, like when to trap, when to deploy traps into certain areas. And basically what he identified through regular surveys in different settings, particularly he was monitoring avocado groves, was that beetles tend to fly, at certain points during the day between 11 and 4 p.m., typically when temperatures are between 20 and 30 degrees Celsius. He also found that peak catches were typically during periods of warm weather followed by longer periods of cold. Presumably that's because that's when the the beetles are like they're accumulating beetles inside of the trees, and then like they're going to stay in there until you get a consistent number of days that reach around 20 degrees, and then they'll want to fly. So that was one. The other one was after long dry periods from moisture loss in trees. So after long dry periods of moisture loss, then the beetles want to escape because the trees are no longer supporting beetle reproduction. And so those were the times where he was catching beetles at those peak periods. And from that, he developed, he found these optimal temperatures, these relative suitability temperatures that you could identify based on temperature in certain locations. These could be in non-infested or infested locations where you could be strategic about when you put out your traps, so you don't have to be deploying traps out, at all times of the year throughout, for us throughout the state. We live in a really big state. So we wanted to be really strategic about that. So, so depending on where you are, timing of trapping was really important, and we wanted to be smart with our resources on when to do that. And so that informed that, when we would be putting those traps out. So this is a map for our statewide trapping program of where those traps are located. We have traps, basically, they were prioritized what they call the leading edge of the infestation. So again, this is the infested area, or the zone of infestation of the invasive shotbolt borers. And they place traps around, they try to get traps placed in locations that are on that leading edge of the infestation, as well as then key locations throughout the Central Valley that would potentially serve as a corridor for spread throughout the state, and along the Coast Range, as well as key sites in the Sierra Nevada and then up north. And then within each of those locations, trees are ground truthed and looked at as well for beetles. Yeah. So the other part that was part of one of the big priorities was doing a risk assessment. That was one of the top priorities for research in the state. And this was something that I led research on that. So part of the risk assessment that I did was utilizing what we know about the host range of these beetles and fungi. Some of the previous work that I've done has looked at the host evolutionary relationships. We've found that that we can use that information about how they're related to actually be able to predict where they're going to be able to cause damage. And so because, these hosts are distributed over this complex landscape, for example, you have like one host like an avocado grove, or you have many hosts distributed like this, in this like native habitat. We wanted to use this knowledge of this this evolutionary understanding of hosts to be able to predict which locations were going to be more vulnerable. And there was good reason to do that because we have had trap catches. This is a location, this is about 250 kilometers north of the most of the leading edge of the infestation. So this was in a trap that the beetle was caught. This was in 2016. What's really interesting, I should kind of point out, is that the beetle is not spreading. We haven't seen any spread beyond that leading edge of the infestation as of yet. Since, even since this trap catch, we're seeing more spread locally, within the zone of infestation, but we're not seeing anything advanced throughout the state just yet. So that's kind of where we are as far as the infestation is concerned. But we have a monitoring plot network throughout the state. So I have a network of 260 monitoring plots from San Diego County all the way up to Ventura County. And these are located in infested and non-infested locations that are in avocado groves, as well as woodlands and native vegetation. So it's in a range of conditions where the beetle can occur. And we're monitoring all of the trees within those sites. We're looking at the amount of disease, and we're also in all of those sites. And then we are also looking at temperature. We have a temperature data logger that we're looking at in all of those sites as well. And basically, what we found, I'll just summarize this, is that the model that we developed, we found that the locations that have a lot of hosts that are really closely related are really heavily susceptible. But there's this interesting thing where the locations where the beetles that are like, that the beetle, where locations that are unfavorable, just, based on these host relationships, if they can produce more beetle generation. So if microclimate does play a role, even though the host community is primary, microclimate can play a role and make those locations more susceptible. So there is a role in microclimate in there, but the host relationships piece and how abundant they are is actually really important. So I'm just gonna skip through this just to highlight. We've made some statewide predictions from this. Based on tree inventories from urban forests, as well as climate data. So we can actually, we're using this information because we are really lucky in the state that we have really complete inventories of tree data, that we can make these statewide predictions to be able to identify potential centers where the beetle is going to spread based on host information and based on microclimate. And so this is also still a work in progress. Right now, we're working on using, integrating this with landscape information as well. And we're integrating this model into bioeconomic modeling data as well to try and use that to inform what's going to be the most cost-effective information too. One of the things that we have found through some of our early bioeconomic modeling is that locations that the monitoring, actually investing in monitoring, the cost of monitoring is actually investing in the monitoring actually outweighs the cost of not doing anything. That was the big thing that we learned from some of our initial assessments. Okay. I'm just looking at time. Okay, so as far as using the model, we want to use the model for control. And so some of the control options that we've been working on in California as well. And these are the things that have been also prioritized in some of those statewide strategic efforts as well. So some of the control options that have been we try to work out include cultural sanitation. So that includes tree removal, pruning infested branches, pruning wound protection strategies, chipping, solarization, restricting firewood movement, chemical control. So using systemic pesticides, trunk sprays to try and control the beetle and the fungi. There's been some work to try and deter or attract the beetles as a way to control them. That has not really been great. And some work to also, there's been some work looking at biocontrol options as well. So as far as handling infested plant material, and I think sanitation is really probably the best option that we have. This combination of monitoring and doing good sanitation practices is really kind of like are the best tools in our toolbox. So Tim Payne at UC Riverside has done the studies to show that chipping plant material to less than an inch kills 99% of the beetles in the plant material. That can be expensive and not always an option. So sometimes it's a good idea. Sometimes you can't do that. So there's been a combination of if you can't do that, cutting your logs and kill drying them and solarizing can be an effective solution. Composting material and solarizing is also an option, and all of that has been effective at killing the beetles. So usually what we found to work is covering the wood piles with a clear plastic tarp, at least for us during the winter for at least 3 months, and then during the summer for 6 weeks has been a useful method if chipping is not an option. Chipping on site. Pesticide trials on landscape trees. So the field pesticide trials that have been done with my collaborators, we've done trials in parks on sycamore. So that's plane trees, platanus. And so they've tried a couple of delivery methods using a tree IV injection system, as well as a quick jet air injection system, and have tried a variety of combinations of fungicides and insecticides on these. So to evaluate these, what they've done is they've injected them, and then within like a 3 feet area, they've before and after injections, they marked the entry holes of the on the tree, and basically over time looked to see if any of these holes were active over time. This is kind of what the thing looks like at the end. Basically, they've looked and they've done this at different sites that are either moderately or heavily infested. And essentially what they found is, so this is kind of the number of attacks per square meter on a tree. This is the untreated control. A lot of these things aren't really different by the time, over time to the untreated control. Bifenthrin and tebuconazole, which is a fungicide, seem to have a significant effect on reducing shot hole borer attack in this moderately infested site. In this heavily infested site, there were a few different fungicides, pesticides, I should say, that reduced attack. The problem, I think, with these was that the retention rates was variable in the tissues, and they needed to be applied on a regular basis. And so it wasn't really a viable option in a long-term viable option, at least for like a park setting or even like in a wild or landscape setting. I don't know what the situation is, and I'm not even sure if any of these are necessarily registered for use. So that's just something to think about. The other thing that we have found is that there's been a lot of secondary fungal infections fungal infections on pesticide treated trees, just from some of these sites as well. So these injection sites have served as infection ports and actually did more damage than the shot hole bore did itself. And then the shot hole bore then serves as has served as a vector for carrying around like these canker pathogens, and has spread Botchospheriae canker from tree to tree. And these are some of the things that we have also seen that have probably had more of an impact than the Fusarium pathogen on these trees itself. These are just for your viewing pleasure. Verbenone as a deterrent is also been tried. I know this has been something that has been worked out in Israel. My understanding is that Dr. Stouthammer has been working on this in California. I know in Israel this has been worked out, and my understanding is that the use of verbenone as a deterrent was not effective within 2 meter distance from a tree. So as far as using it as a deterrent, like on a large scale, that like as far as how that would be used kind of in a large scale kind of management strategy, I'd be interested in having some conversations about how that could be applied. Natural enemies and parasitoids. This is Dr. Stouthammer and Dr. Cape Escalin are working with colleagues in Taiwan and Vietnam, the countries of origin of the beetles. They've been finding natural enemies. They have identified a parasitoid wasp. They are conducting studies. They did an initial search and found a parasitoid wasp in 2018. They had difficulty rearing the wasp in quarantine. They did another trip about 6 months ago and came back, and so this was their trip. They pruned some wood and brought it back to the quarantine at UC Riverside, and they identified 3 common parasitoids of Eualacia fornicatus species complex in Taiwan. And so they're just kind of working out some of the details on this. I won't go in all the details right now, but they were able to do some artificial parasitism of the wasp in the quarantine lab. So there is some signs of something happening. So, so that's kind of interesting. And there is some plans to continue exploring this in the future. The challenge with the biocontrol and the parasitoid wasp, I don't know if there's been a good example of biocontrol being effective on any bark or ambrosia beetle. I don't think there's a good example of that. And I think it's just one of those things like we're just kind of trying to find all of the different tools in our toolbox that we can. And so the idea is to just keep trying, but just with the understanding that this hasn't been something that we've had a good history at doing. So just keeping that in mind. Entomopathogen fungi, Bavaria bassiana has been effective in controlling other Eualacia species in the southeastern United States because it's humid. In the US, it doesn't work, or sorry, in California, it doesn't work, it's too dry. It doesn't stick on the tree. We've tried applying it with this foamy stuff and it just like melts off. So that has not been effective. And we've also, I'm gonna skip through this because I just want to get through. Okay, so I just want to get to here. So a lot of the culture and sanitation methods, I went through some of the chemical control methods, attractants and deterrents, and biocontrol. And so as far as some of the work that we've done in Disneyland and using this as a model for integrated pest management, it seems kind of silly, but Disneyland actually has 16,000 trees in its park and over 6,000 tree species. And so it's actually a highly biodiverse park in California. And it's a representative of a highly biodiverse urban forest. And we got involved because they had a heavy PSHB infestation in the park. And the way that they responded was they panicked and they ended up injecting hundreds of their trees with systemic pesticides as a response. So there has been, there is the evidence that pesticides can work and they can be effective, but like I was saying, they're expensive. They require, multiple injections over time, and they can be infection courts for other pathogens. And so they ended up doing a lot more damage on their trees. They caused burns. They were getting secondary canker pathogens, and it ended up being way more expensive and a bigger cost on them. And so we got involved and implemented a IPM program in the park with their horticulture department, with the natural resource advisor, with the urban forester there, and with myself. And basically on a monthly basis, we went in and we visited every tree and we monitored their trees. We trained them how to identify the pests and the lookalike beetles appropriately. So they got trained on how to be able to identify these guys. And then we implemented a trapping program. So around the perimeter of the park, we had traps around the perimeter, 64 traps. And then around the interior of the park, we put in around 64 traps. And then we also monitored the trees around those traps as well. And we use this as a way to identify hotspots. And by doing this and doing the heavy monitoring, what we were able to do was, okay, so we monitored the trees, and then based on the level of infestation, we go through, here we go. We identified certain factors for each of those tree species. So the response was based on whether it was a reproductive host, how infested the tree was, the value of that tree, like where it was located, whether it was presenting kind of a hazard. And then we developed this like management matrix to basically guide the decision on what to do with that particular tree in the park. So it was very context dependent and very strategic. So it wasn't just this mass kind of injection across the park, but it was very much tailored to the particular like needs in that particular location. And then from that, we then did all of these different, used this menu of options to treat these trees. We use that combination of those different control methods. And we went in and pruned trees. Through the trapping, we were able to then detect early when trees were being hit. We removed branches, reduced the propagule pressure off of these trees. And I'll just get to the punch. And then only when we had to, we would do the injections. So it was very much when we had to do it. And so in the end, this was the number of beetles that we were capturing at the beginning of this program. And then over time, the population actually dramatically decreased because of these ongoing efforts that we instilled. So I think the take-home message just from these efforts that we did in Disneyland is that not all hope is lost. Shot hopeworm can be managed. And I think it's just, coming up with a strategy, like a combination of different efforts and using your menu of options, monitoring good sanitation practices, and doing your research and learning from what you do. And we're still learning, and hopefully, it can be managed. We just have to learn how to live with it too. So I think that's all I got. So yeah, thank you.
Don't agree with what it's saying.
I know.
Yeah.
We panicked too.
Shannon, thank you very much. That's like a quick tour of Polyphagous, the research, of great interest. I think there's some really, really important lessons to take out of it. So we're sitting where California, it's in our commercial clubs, apart from others.
Yeah.
And there's obviously a lot of nervousness around the California almond industry.
Yeah.
That is not big, it's super big and goes right up the Central Valley. So once it gets in there, it's just going to be able to hop up. We have a similar problem. Before I start asking silly questions, are there any questions from the floor? Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for your presentation. The movement of wood between it from areas.
Yeah.
So I'm assuming that with if you're doing your avos, it's not such a movement of wood is not a real way of moving it, the insect within and movement of the avo wood. But what about movement of wood for barbecues, mesquite, prosopis, things like that from Mexico? Is there a risk coming in from Mexico? Is there this risk with wood, firewood?
100%. That is one of the primary modes of movement of any pest in the United States is movement of firewood or green waste, at least from like human mediated movement. And it's a problem because we don't have a quarantine on movement of firewood. And so a lot of that is, there's big campaigns in California, education campaigns. You know, we have the Don't Move Firewood campaign to try, you know, in campgrounds and in other places to try and, you know, get the word out about the importance of firewood as a vector. But it's a challenge. Yeah. And that's probably why we saw those jumps. Either those jumps, it's either firewood, green waste, or ports of entry.
Or 3 and 42.
Yeah.
Yeah, you had a.
Yeah, just two questions. The one question is, when you were doing your solar treatment, why are you using clear plastic, not black plastic, from a heat perspective? And the other question was, you know, when you're talking about the control, is there a critical percentage that you're aiming at to say you've got control when you're using whatever it is, whether it's a biological or whether it's a chemical? Like, do you want to get down to 20%, or is there a critical value that you're aiming at?
That's a good question. So the first question is, so for the tarp, the clear plastic tarp is actually more effective. You need the UV light to go through, to penetrate, to actually increase the heat. So they've actually done the chipping study where they compared the black tarp and clear tarp, and they showed a significant difference. As far as just, I think your threshold for control and tolerance, I think that is, I think that's a decision that is determined by the manager and the user, and also probably regulators. It may, so, you know, for us, when we're talking about movement of plant material or like, you know, the chip material, we're saying we don't want any beetles in chipped material. So 99.9% is our threshold.
Because when you saw that last slide where you had the comparison where you,
Yeah. But
to recover, you know, there's got to be some, you know, you've got to get it to a certain level to allow your tree to recover. So I mean, it was for me encouraging to say you can actually reverse it, that you can get that tree. You don't have to just go and then cut down your trees, which seems to be the standard cure here at the moment.
sometimes, yeah, it's really context dependent. So one of the things I think in that management matrix that we put, sorry, too many slides. So one of the things that I think that we're finding is that it's a tricky decision. And again, it can depend on the host. And it depends on the context, but there are, so for example, box elder. In our minds, box elder is like ice cream for for the beetles. And it is, the beetles get in and it goes, the propagular pressure just goes skyrockets, and it's just like a huge source of inoculum for the beetles. So in our minds, that drives the epidemic. Remove the tree. In other cases, like our plane trees, they can also drive the epidemic, but they can also recover.
And oak trees?
Depends on the oak. So our native oaks will get hit. We won't remove an oak tree, our native oak trees, because they will only get attacked really hard if they are in a disease hotspot, and they're surrounded by other host tree species that are just kind of raining beetles on them. So it just really depends. So the idea is kind of, the key is monitoring and keeping an eye on those trees and identifying at what point are they getting worse, and at what point is it time to remove the tree. I think, and it can be a tricky business, but we have seen trees that were really heavily infested that do recover. And then we see trees that were heavily infested that recover, and then they get heavily infested again. So it's not hard and fast.
Thanks, Shannon. Actually, two questions. One is regarding the lure. I assume you also use reciprocal lures, and obviously we've seen, when you hang the trap in a tree, it tends to go for that tree. So did you see the same thing? And then also, obviously, your Disneyland situation is quite unique, and it's obviously a great model to show what is possible. But am I correct if I say that it looks like it was quite laborious and, depending on a lot of expert input?
Yeah.
So my question to you is is there enough capacity to respond in that same way on a larger scale?
Yeah.
And what should you?
That's a fantastic question. So I'll answer your first one. We have found, I wouldn't, I have observed that if you just hang a trap like on a branch, it will, we'll see beetles attacks subsequently. And so I tend to prefer to have a trap like on a rebar or something away from a tree, 5 or 10 meters away from a tree. And as far as yes, Disneyland has a lot of resources to be able to have that kind of a response. It's a heavily managed site. And so I think it's a lesson about, what's possible with good monitoring and good sanitation practices. And and that's, not everybody is going to have 16,000 trees as well, and 6,000 tree species either. So I think just understanding the scale of what they're working with and the scale of kind of what you're working with either. I wouldn't say that this is something that could maybe be adopted on in a wildland forest. But they have been able to manage, for example, in avocado groves. It is manageable in avocado groves now. We originally thought that it was going to completely decimate the avocado industry when we were first kind of, when this was first introduced. And we did a trip to Israel, and we toured all of the Israeli avocado groves and everything. And we were truly concerned. And our colleagues found, and we found kind of later as well, after doing our monitoring efforts, that it's this combination between the beetle attacking avocado and those holes serving as infection ports for canker pathogens to come in is what was amplifying the problem. And so when they were doing good sanitation practices and pruning branches and removing Botchospheric canker, that was actually, they were able to keep their avocado groves in good shape. So I think, these large orchards were doing well.
Sorry, Nico had his hand up. How do I get?
No, you can answer yourself.
Nico, do you want to shoot a question?
Yes, thank you. Thanks, Matthew. I just want to ask Dr. Lynch, is there any preventative measures we can take if we're in an area that doesn't have any infestation so far? What can we do in a area where we farm apples and pears, for instance, totally as a preventative measure?
Preventative measures?
That's
I
right.
would say, I mean, I would just say monitor. I mean, like I said, we have not found, we haven't found, I didn't show this, but like in the locations where we've tested pesticides in locations that were lightly infested. And in some of those cases, like the pesticides, like the attack holes were higher on trees that were treated with pesticides than the controls. And so I'm not sure, I would just stay away from doing, we don't have any good preventative measures right now.
Right, thank you.
Yeah.
Just to compliment, I'd like to ask Shannon, I've had a couple of growers, they remote. They haven't got it,
Close the campsite.
and they've taken down their susceptible trees.
Which ones?
Funny enough, windbreaks like Chinese poplar, out of the system, cut it down, removed. Beefwood was another one, Casuarina. They cut it. So that just lowers any, to me, it appeals to me, because if they do get in, yeah. To me, that's the only, it's the only one,
Yeah.
not the one, but the only sort of proactive. So, let me introduce you. I don't know if you know these people.
I'm Paul Barker. I'm at 4 hectare arboretum for these 211 species for trees leveled. We took the proactive measure of removing iron shut because they were sentient for starters. But I think we also shot ourselves in the foot by removing our oxbows because we could have used them as a sentinel species. The same thing I think with the Chinese poplars. I think leaving some of those sentinel species might be more beneficial than leaving them all, because it's actually a monitoring. You can use them for monitoring.
Well, there's the.
But I'm just saying.
Sentinel, treaty rights, correct me if I'm wrong, is involved in international effort in terms of using botanic garden sentinel trees to detect invasives. And a whole heap more incidentally trees, personal trees. In a botanic garden sentinel.
Again, I think it's one of those things where there isn't really a right or wrong answer, but
Yeah.
I also am inclined to support removal of things that you know are going to allow the beetle to establish and really get going. Especially if you're in a more remote location and there's not necessarily going to be other things that it will get going on as readily as some of those windbreak species. So if you're trapping or monitoring, you're still going to pick it up if it's in the area.
With a trap.
Yeah.
Yeah. I would almost be inclined to say you could remove a really highly susceptible host in a trap if you wanted to monitor. Right?
Yeah.
I'll think about the traps compared to the most susceptible host.
I mean, efficient enough.
Got a tree like that, you got a trap like that.
No,
Well-
it's relevant, but if they're there, and you're
Yeah.
gonna- you're trapping
They're
over
there.
time as well, you're gonna pick them up, the trapping density.
Just
I've
put
got-
them, yeah, the
I've got a-
density is.
A problem with trapping density, how dense do we go? We've got 400 traps up, or we will have 400 traps up this year, over quite a big area, that's Kangaroo series, are here. Really, Morgan, Villiers-Dorf, Edinburgh, it's a big area, it's most probably not 45,000, but it's damn close to a very high percentage of it. It's trap density is low. Where do you go? You put them in urban areas because from near use, because you know it gets in there because of the vector being people, and we love barbecue in this country. They love using specific wood. And we have no control of it. So, yeah, ports are effectively etched up in Cape Town, Somerset West, Johannesburg,
So, yeah, we've been using products in order to monitor things, just predicting the virus. That seems to be quite effective. It's the easiest one to spot. They get affected, so they can't. I think we're pretty sharp with this sensible monitoring.
And then you.
I guess it's just-
Yeah,
You remove the tree.
ideally.
yeah.
Is there a windbreak that you can replace it with? Should I say, are there trees that it will not go into?
Yeah, pine
So,
trees.
fine.
Conifers.
The pine tree windbreak, and we've got a whole lot of research money is going to go to seconds. Yeah. We're going to have to look very hard for in an urban context and in an agricultural context. We can't do without windbreak. What are we going to plant? It's very easy to take the windbreak above the experimental orchard on Lawrence. It's dying. It's shot. And sorry, I harp on this and please comment. It's a inoculum question. All the time. Universal for idea. Got lots of beetles. They're going to hammer your trees. I don't know what's going to happen if you've got low inoculum pressure in that pear orchard, for example. We might not have a problem. You might have 1 or 2 holes in the trees. At the moment, we've got up to 150 in some states. Why? Because they're just beetles everywhere, because they're hosted.
We've been monitoring the individual trees with a number of holes in it. I've actually seen holes disappear. Is that related to the time of the year or the season, and then the next season comes along and then there's fungus that actually hits the tree when it really needs all the juice? Or
So sometimes the host can wall it off and compartmentalize the gallery. So it just closes it up and responds. So sometimes that's part of just like the recovery that we see too.
it's a box over, by the way.
Okay, no, I don't know.
From most of the injection images I've seen, the injections seem to be in the upper parts of the tree in the basal area. ISO has changed their modality around where injection shots will be into the root flares because there's more conductive material. Is that something that the researchers have been looking into to find different injection sites and monitor the uptake where there's more conductive material?
So one of the things that they are doing as like a targeted approach is on very few trees is actual spot injections. So instead of delivering with one of those you know, IV injections, but like using like a needle and just doing like 0.1 milliliters and like squirting it into a hole. And just killing a family in an entry hole. But that's like very highly targeted and very, very specific, but I don't know if I've seen a lot of people doing trials on like you know, higher up on the tree.
Well, it's actually low down.
Oh, and the root flares.
Root flare in particular.
Yeah.
And I say changed from nasal.
Yeah.
To root flare, 2 years.
Yeah.
Oh, I've got so mixed emotions about that.
Yeah.
Because if you do the systemic chemicals spread in trees, we know that, you know, the imidacloprid goes flipping everywhere in your tree within 10 days if you inject. The problem is getting enough concentration for the stuff to do the job.
Well, that's why I think that specifically Radman Ecosciences has moved in this direction, where Object hasn't moved in this direction to root flares. They've also moved away from products, and they've also moved to the recommendation of the application of Bacillus subtilis after removing, and obviously a lot more biosecurity and cleaning the material. And from what I'm seeing from Radar Sciences activities in California, it does from arborists. They're starting to see way better effects from root flare applications than the arthromasal applications, which are injecting insecticides, and they're reducing their costs. So
I have seen like other delivery methods too that they're testing out. I know Keith Escalent is working with like a company that is, I don't remember the mechanism, but they are working with like other delivery methods. I don't think it's in the root flare, but it doesn't cause as much injury to the tree.
The little pockets magnet.
No, I can't remember.
Little bubbles.
I'll look it up. Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. Sorry. I have 2 questions. One is about the Bourbonnais. Did you play around with different release rates and
Yes,
concentration?
I didn't personally, but my colleagues did. Yeah.
Okay, and I'm assuming the 2 meter radius was the correct outcome you got. Okay, and then the second question, just out of interest, what did you use to cover up the holes? Because you looked, I saw one of your slides, you had a covered up hole, and then you looked at whether or not they put that hole open again. Yeah,
so they use like a latex paint, like a white latex paint. Yeah. And so if you cover up the hole with that paint, you can tell if the hole is active right away, because the female doesn't like anything that's obstructing the gallery. So she'll come out right away and pop it open.
So would you then monitor immediately after you look at it?
You can monitor anything that's like popped open as an active hole. Yeah.
Polyvinyl acetate with the controller. Right.
To you, isn't the more interesting one going to be how the ever growers got their issue sort of, I wouldn't say, under control, but at least managed?
Different reasons. Sorry, you've seen more of it than I have.
Say that again?
So obviously you used the Disneyland example.
Yeah.
We kind of got a solution, and working with the growers I work with, it's not a really satisfactory solution. Like black and white things. And you know, what about? I mean, you use the example of the Evo farms. You know, being a tremendous threat initially, and now that you 10 years down the line, we're not 10 years down the line yet. There could be some interesting learnings there.
Can I share?
Yeah.
Number one.
You haven't done that already.
No, the beetles on Avos in the States, the beetles go for side branches.
Yeah.
So it's sanitation.
Yeah, they're not going for the main trunk. And in Israel as well.
Okay, so that's not a solution.
And it's fascinating in those in high density pear orchards, and it appears to be not so high density apple and stone fruit orchards. It's in the bottom meter of the stem that it's going.
It's a different situation.
Why does it? Don't ask. I don't know. But a solution to that question, answer to that question.
And for us, the avocado and coast live oak in California, those are the only hosts that where the beetles don't prefer the main trunk.
Matthew, what you need to do is do a GMO on those males and you release the males with a special GMO thing so that they target the rocks.
No, there's no door open there. The females produce their own males in the gathering, mate, and then only females come out and they are mated. There's no door.
And the males also won't fly, just the
Yeah,
males.
and the males.
Right.
They just get.
Yeah, the males don't fly.
Same old story, sorry.
By the way, I wanted to point out, I wanted to get back to the traffic density question. That's talked about in that report, that SciSac report. The traffic density, so if people were asking about traffic density, that's outlined in that report. Yeah.
We will come back to.
Yeah.
So over the past 10 years that we've had this and we've been educating people and telling everyone about it, would you say that the average person on the street knows about it? And that they are aware of this issue and they know not to bear wood around after 10 years?
The average person on the street.
This is Southern California talking about.
I would say in Southern California. I would say, I don't know about the average, but I would say a good number of people have heard about it. Now.
Are they listening and complying, or just heard about it?
I would say that people are interested and they're concerned because it hits people differently. Because people have different interests, come at it with different interests. I don't know if there hasn't necessarily been any, we haven't used like the hammer as a tool. It's been mostly like a carrot kind of thing. Like the state has, tried to say, hey, we'll CAL FIRE, our like one of our state agencies said, we'll remove this tree from your yard because it's a fire hazard, kind of a thing. And there's funding to remove it. And there might be pushback, but there's kind of more of a concerted effort to talk and engage first before the hammer, if that makes sense. So I don't know if the hammer has really been necessary. That makes sense. Yeah.
Just on another Matthew, with the second beetle coming from Taiwan, should South Africa be looking at any phytosanitary or any additional any additional steps to prevent a second attack?
No, I don't think it's the same. They've redone. It's been in the pipeline. They're restructuring the border force.
Do we have to?
Apparently they do. This thing, sorry, and this is negative, forgive me, but it's call it for what it is. This is failure of our biosecurity regulations in this country, plain and simple. Body. Are there more out there? Yeah, there's some really nasty ones. One doesn't want to alarm people, but then the one they've got, the latest one they've got eats laurel trees. including it's like a champion, it's even, and there most probably 3, 4 others. Yeah, no, it's obviously not working. But then on the other side of the fence, Australia is rabid about the biosecurity. They've got it in Perth. Yeah. Perth's got a pissy little harbour that's way over there. And it is small, isn't it? It's not, it's tiny, it looks like it's tiny. And it's in Perth. Now, that's Australia, and they got it. So maybe it's an inevitable.
Can I come back? Because you said the average person. I would say that the people who we need to get to know about it, if that makes sense. Like, there's been a lot of outreach at, like, for example, wood turner expos, and these people who have like all of these different kinds of sports expos, people like hunters, and I don't know, like all of these different kinds of people. Outdoor people and stuff like that. So I think there's been a concerted effort to reach out to those people who might be, you wouldn't think of, that might be kind of in some odd way spreading it. So,
but that's not their bread and butter.
Right.
And that's our dichotomy. The people who know about it, who are concerned about it, because they're concerned about their trees, are the people who can actually afford to be concerned about the trees for the most part. Whereas the bigger problem with the movement of the wood lies with people for whom it is a survival issue.
Mm-hmm.
And
sure.
it becomes a very different conversation. With many layers of how do we now approach it. So yes, again, that's also one way the hammer isn't going to work, because
but that answers what they mean, where you can formalize what the vegetation removal. And then it's trade because
also Huntington Botanical.
Yes.
So interesting. Yes. I haven't seen too much of late from them. The couple of takeaways. Yes. They have got more money than good. Yes. And they still chose to not treat and remove because they thought it was a waste of time. And are we talking about specifically the coastline oak, which was one of their sensible? I think one of their big oaks. Was it a hole or a?
No, they've removed.
Yeah,
they've removed a lot of trees.
And they used repellents quite a lot in the beginning.
Yeah, it didn't work.
And then around their green waste aggregation, we had a chat to Dan Berry, he recommends that was the most effective use of repellents in combination with attractants was around their green waste facilities. And I think they had something like 12 composting sites around the Huntington. So I think he's left now.
Yeah, he's gone. Yeah.
And kind of on top of that, I've deployed 1,000 repellents.
Oh, okay.
Massive tree.
And
I have sleepless nights that it's mainly attracting beetles. Which is, I guess we're going to find out because I've got a tree equally as large next to it, which I haven't deployed repellents on. Yeah. We'll find out at some point.
I think that's the thing too. My understanding is with the deterrents, like you would need a lot of them. Yeah, for it to be effective.
2 meter radius, 36 full tree with 36 meter canopy stack. It's about 1,000 of those.
Why not?
Please feel free to continue asking questions. I just want to thank you again. And thank you.